Badass of the Week is produced by High Five Content. September 23rd, 1779. Another broadside of cannon fire ripples from the gun decks of HMS Serapis, slamming home with fire and fury. From the command deck of his frigate, Captain John Paul Jones of the fledgling American Navy tightly grips the railing as shrapnel, fire, and explosions of splintered wood rake across his warship, wounding men and shredding sails and supports. He steadies himself and surveys the situation through thick billows of black smoke. Men are screaming and running about, reloading cannons, pulling up sails, repairing rigging, and putting out fires. In the lower decks, the men furiously try to pump out seawater from the lower gun deck, but they're fighting a losing battle against the ocean itself. The ship is listing. It's taking on too much water. It's on fire. With his vessel crippled and more than half his crew dead or wounded, facing off against a frontline warship from the most powerful fleet on Earth, John Paul Jones makes a decision that will place his name amongst the most daring naval commanders in American history. He orders his men to turn the ship about and prepare to ram the enemy. Hello, and welcome back to Badass of the Week. My name is Ben Thompson, and I am here with my co-host, Dr. Pat Larish. Pat, it is about to be summertime. I was about to say where you're at because I'm so used to spending time in Brazil, but it's summertime where we are at in the Northern Hemisphere currently.
Yes.
So
Warm
you're finishing
weather.
up school, yeah?
Yeah, just about to finish up. I still have some faculty meetings to go to, but that's life.
Mm-hmm.
And then, then I can kick back and relax with a refreshing beverage.
Yes.
I actually had a mocktail mojito today.
Oh.
So that was pretty nice. I had some watermelon in it.
Okay.
So I guess it was a mocktail watermelon mojito. It was pretty good.
Yeah. All right. That doesn't sound too bad. I made Martha Washington's rum punch from our episode with AJ Jacobs. I've been like one drink behind on our podcast, and I think this week I'm two because last week I was with our producer Andrew Jacobs, and then 2 weeks ago we were with AJ Jacobs talking about constitutional badasses, and he gave us the recipe for Martha Washington's rum punch.
Ooh, so did you do some research on Martha Washington's rum punch?
Yes, and AJ sent it to me. So it's from the Mount Vernon website, also has it on there. So it is as he described it. It's very citrus forward. It's two different kinds of rum, a white and a dark. It's orange curacao, some simple syrup, lemon juice, orange juice, some lemons, some oranges, nutmeg, cinnamon sticks, cloves. So you've got all the like nutmeg stuff. And then you've got all of the citrus stuff. I think it's designed to be, you were talking about summer beverages. I think it's designed to be like served in a giant punch bowl at a party.
Yeah, sounds like it. Yeah. And it's got boiling water, so you steep it all or mull it or whatever. And
okay. So it's warm. I kind of did a mini version of it. So, I used orange juice. I didn't make the giant, because the recipe is like, 3/4 lemons, you should make a whole, this is a whole giant bowl kind of situation. I made a smaller version of it. It's not bad. It's not warm. I just made it cold and I used orange juice instead of boiling water. And the most striking difference between the version I made and the version in the recipe is that I didn't have orange curacao. So I used blue curacao, which mixed with the orange juice to change the drink like a neon green.
Oh, yeah. It looks like it's some sort of like juice bar beverage with like, I don't know, algae in it or something.
Yeah, it looks like Green Machine, the Naked Juice Green Machine. It kind of looks like that.
Yeah.
It's good.
Is there kale hiding in there?
Yes. No, it's just weird blue liquor. But yes, it changes it in a very dramatic visual way. But it's good. Yeah, it's very citrusy and you can taste the nutmeg and all that stuff. So yeah, I recommend it. It's on their website. Maybe we'll post it with the episode. But pretty good. Not bad.
Nice.
I can recommend.
Nice. Okay.
So do you have anything fun planned for the summer?
Nothing major. I am traveling around to visit friends and family. Probably melt into a little puddle at some point because they're calling for a hot summer. So,
oh gosh,
yeah. How about you?
I will be going back down to Florida this summer to see the town where I grew up, and we're going to go down to Key West, and we're going to go on a cruise of the Caribbean, just one of these couple days cruises, with the family out to the Bahamas and the Dominican. We were going to go to Haiti, but that part of the trip is off now, which is kind of a bummer. But anyway, somebody else, the person we're talking about this week, is somebody else who did some touring of the Caribbean during his adventures.
There we go.
Yeah.
And who is this guy? That
is going to be my interesting transition from Martha Washington's Rum Punch to talking about the naval warfare exploits of John Paul Jones, the father of the United States Navy. Although, in doing research for this, I came across there is a distillery in Scotland, in roughly the town where John Paul Jones was born. John Paul Jones is famous for being an American war hero, but he was born in Scotland. And there is a Lowlands rum that is being distilled by a group called, by a company called John Paul Jones. So John Paul Jones rum, John Paul Jones Lowland rum. I tried to order some online for the show, but I don't think they ship to the U.S., so I wasn't able to figure out how to get it to accept the U.S. address. So unfortunately, okay. But that also
one of these days.
Yes, I will make Martha Washington's Rum Punch with John Paul Jones rum. That would be awesome.
There you go, convergence.
Yes,
yeah.
Yes. So yes, we are going to talk about John Paul Jones, and it is not the guy from Led Zeppelin, although No Quarter is an awesome song, and also something that John Paul Jones talked about occasionally. Giving no quarter, a very pirate thing to offer.
Yes.
And so, yeah, we are going to take a really quick break. And when we come back, we are going to talk about Captain John Paul Jones, the father of the United States Navy, somebody who once said, "I wish to have no connection with any ship that does not sail fast, for I intend to go in harm's way." John Paul Jones was born in Scotland in the year 1747. He, from a very young age, decided that he wanted to be someone who was part of the sea, a sailor, an adventurer on the high seas.
The salt was calling to him.
Yes, it was. He got a job as a ship's mate at the age of 12. And from that point on, he got on a boat and he would spend the rest of his life associated with naval vessels of various sizes and shapes and combat abilities. So at the age of 12, he sets sail and begins traveling the Atlantic. He sails from England to the New World. And one of the good jobs, if you were, he's a ship's mate, which means he was kind of doing various jobs aboard a ship. At 12, you're doing whatever they tell you to do. And he kind of begins to ascend along the way, ascend through the ranks.
He was probably swabbing the deck a lot.
Probably doing that kind of stuff. I think like Treasure Island, all the jobs they gave the kid in that book.
Yeah.
That kind of stuff. Peeling potatoes, things like that. He is taking jobs on various ships. Some of them are merchant ships sailing goods and supplies back and forth from the New World to England. And at some point, he, and some of the ships that he's sailing on are slave ships. Atlantic slave trade ships going down to the Caribbean and to South Carolina. He is learning how to be on the seas, how to be a sailor, and he really likes it. But he has a really hard time, understandably, with the way that these human beings are being treated aboard these ships. He decides, after having done some merchant work, he gets into the slave trade, which was very profitable for you if you were a sailor. But for him, after being aboard these ships for a while, he can't handle it. He doesn't like being part of human trafficking and decides he can't do it in good conscience. So when one of the slave ships he's working on puts into port in Jamaica, he quits. He just walks off the ship and he never comes back.
Okay.
Yeah. It's understandable.
Potentially leaving that career behind him.
Right. And, he kind of hangs out in Jamaica for a little bit, but realizes he's got to get back out on the sea. So he joins up with a different crew. It's a brig called John. It's a merchant trader.
So just John.
John. Like, you know, we have all these grand names for the, you know, all these various ships and things, the Defiance or the, you know, HMS Belfast or whatever. But this is just called John, like the guy's name. And so, yeah, he is aboard this ship. He's a first mate so he's aboard this ship. And then at some point during their travels, and the merchant trading in the 1740s, 1750s is extremely dangerous. This is like the golden age. Yeah. It's the golden age of piracy. You've got sharks, you've got sailing ships, you've got storms, right? You're on a wooden sailing boat, traveling the Atlantic, right? Which had never been done before, only a couple hundred years earlier. And so at some point during this one voyage aboard John, the captain and the first mate both die. I don't know if it's scurvy. I don't know if they were eaten by sharks or killed by pirates or whatever, but they both are killed. And the people who own the ship, they put John Paul Jones in charge. So he's appointed the shipmaster of the John, which sounds like a bathroom joke.
It does. but this is the name of a ship, so it's actually a big deal.
Yes. And so John Paul Jones takes over as shipmaster, and he is a very knowledgeable sailor. He's very good at what he does. He's in his 20s now. He's been doing this for at least 10 years now. He's pretty good, but
he's got his 10,000 hours in.
Yes, exactly. He's almost certainly had 10,000 hours of this. But he's also kind of a hothead, and that's one thing we're going to find out about John Paul Jones' character, is that he's like a hot-headed guy, and he gets into trouble a lot. He drinks hard, he gets into fights, he uses a lot of bad language. And in 1773, this guy, a member of his crew, starts to like be a little insubordinate, refuses to follow orders, gives John Paul Jones a hard time. So John Paul Jones does what you did in these days when that happened. You have that insubordinate crew member tied to the mast and whipped with a whip, which is just a thing that happened on board British sailing ships.
Standard operating procedure?
Yes. I think John Paul Jones might have been a little too enthusiastic about it because the guy died from his wounds, which sounds pretty serious. Really rough. And then later on, some of the other guys on board the ship tried to organize a mutiny against John Paul Jones. So he found out about it. He thwarted the mutiny, and then he ordered the leader of the mutiny to be executed. This is things that were done in British sailing ships, but it also was not a good look for John Paul Jones, who kind of had his good name as a sailor of many years tarnished by accusations of cruelty and murder. So he did what any Brit accused of cruelty and murder did back in the 18th century. He fled for the colonies.
Okay. How did the colonies receive him once he got there?
Well, he had a brother. He had a rich brother, which was nice.
Oh, convenient.
Right. Yeah, that works out really well for him. This was one of these days where, back in the days where the first son inherited everything. Inherited the father's estate, the family's estate, and the second
keep
son,
it all intact.
Right. We don't divide the kingdom amongst the sons. We assign it all to the oldest son. He can parse it out however he sees fit. John Paul Jones was the second son, which is how he ended up sailing around on a trading vessel in the Caribbean, while his brother had a huge estate in Fredericksburg, Virginia. But anyway, John Paul Jones goes there, and he arrives in Virginia in 1775, which is right around the time that all the fireworks are about to start happening in the colonies.
Yes.
So it's about this time, 1775, that the colonies decide they're sick of paying taxes, and they decide
sick of paying taxes without representation.
Yes, that's fair. That's a really good point.
And when you're sick of paying taxes without representation, you
kill a lot of British people.
Apparently. Okay.
you start a revolution, which is what they did. That's the nicer way to say that. So they start a revolution, and while there were some advantages to being in the colonies, you were fighting on your home turf. There was a huge ocean between the British and bringing reinforcements over to the colonies.
Vast forests you can use for lumber.
Right. The terrain, your supply lines are shorter. There's a lot of advantages to the geography of fighting as the colonies. One of the disadvantages was that the United States had no, or I guess the colonies at this point, they had no navy. And the British had the Royal Navy, which was the most powerful navy on Earth by a pretty decent amount.
Yeah. That was how the British Empire became the British Empire.
Yes. That was one thing that they were excellent at, was building a lot of big giant boats and putting a lot of cannons on them and dominating the oceans of the world. It's how you build the biggest empire in human history. And that is what the Brits were able to do here. So the colonies, they have, I think when AJ Jacobs was on our show talking about the constitutional badasses, one of the guys that he mentioned had been a privateer. That was a thing that was put up in the Constitution. But even before that, the colonies were hiring privateers, which was, hey, are you pro-independence? Do you have a boat? Would you like to put some cannons on it and attack British shipping, attack British, supply ships? Go ahead and do it. We won't think you're a pirate. We'll say you're a hero. But you're paying for everything, but you also get to keep whatever you loot, whatever you capture from the enemy. They had some of that. Which
could appeal to certain people.
Sure. It's like, government-sponsored piracy. Not too bad.
Actually, yeah.
And John Paul Jones wasn't doing that, though. They had some of those guys, but, outside of them, the United States Navy was, or what would become the United States Navy, was like pretty small. It was like, some tiny boats, a couple lighthouses.
Yeah.
Stuff like that.
Yeah.
It was not going to rival the Royal Navy in terms of anything.
And a lot of moxie, but moxie in and of itself isn't necessarily going to defeat the British Navy.
Right. And they needed experience. Speaking of moxie, they needed experienced sailors who knew what they were doing. Right. A lot of these Royal Navy guys were loyal to the Royal Navy, and they were not going to join the revolution. John Paul Jones didn't really have much to go back to in Scotland. He was here, and there was a war, and the colonial navy was going to overlook all of those transgressions of, accidentally killing a guy and then killing another guy on purpose. Like, that wasn't quite as big of a deal to the people who were hard up for literally anybody who could sail a ship.
Yeah, especially if he directs it towards the Brits.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
You can accidentally or on purpose kill as many of them as you want to.
Yes.
In the service of, I guess that's not true. There are rules of war, but.
There are rules of war, but within the rules of war, there is opportunity to kill people on purpose.
Yes, that's true. And I mean, like, really importantly, what they're offering John Paul Jones is an opportunity to get behind the wheel of a ship again. They're going to promote him to a higher level. They are going to, give him a command. They're going to give this guy a position of like prestige and power on a level that he has never had before, right? Ships, shipmaster is not captain. He had kind of worked his way up. He'd been trying to do this his whole life, and he's had all of these things. He quit his job and had to start back over again. He got promoted back up like pretty close to the top, and then he had all of this. He killed that guy, and then the other guys tried to mutiny against him, and then he got kind of blacklisted from the merchant fleet, and now he's getting a second chance. And this appointment to command a warship is more in line with the attitude and the temperament of John Paul Jones than sailing around on a merchant vessel.
Indeed, yes. And it's a challenge worthy of his talents. The U.S. Navy had like maybe just a handful of ships, and then the British Navy has 250 going on 300 ships. Yeah. And it's clear to anyone that the United States Navy, quote unquote Navy, has zero chance of taking on Britain on the high seas if you go about it in any sort of normal way. And this might look like a suicide mission in some ways. Like who in their right mind would actually sign up for this?
Right.
And you got to be either committed to the cause or just really cruising for a bruising or just really wanting to get, climbing up a mizzen mast. I do not know what a mizzenmast is. I'm sure I can look it up. John Paul Jones, I think, did not have to look up what a mizzenmast was.
That gave him a leg up on a lot of the potential sailors for the Continental Navy.
Yeah. So John Paul Jones, he shows up and he says, hey, I want to join the Navy / be a privateer / get back on the sea and do stuff. And so Ben, you and I were talking about how he accidentally killed a guy sort of on purpose, and he on purpose killed a guy, and but that doesn't necessarily define him, because when he joins the Continental Navy, such as it was, he says, an honorable peace is and always was my first wish. I can take no delight in the effusion of human blood. But if this war should continue, I wish to have the most active part in it.
Which I love. So good.
Yeah.
Such a good quote.
So he has principles.
Yes. Yeah, he has principles. He's an honorable guy, and we're going to see some more of that as he goes on. So they appoint him senior first lieutenant aboard one of the few warships that the U.S. Navy is able to put together. He is the first man to hoist a United States naval ensign over a U.S. vessel. And I'm saying U.S., but it was Continental. The 30-gun Alfred. He was on John, and now he's on Alfred. And he hoists the ensign up. He's the first person to do that, to hoist the Continental ensign. And the Alfred sets out. 30 guns is a pretty big warship, and it sets out up and down the East Coast under a Continental flag, so not privateering. And they are sailing up and down the East Coast, sacking and plundering British merchant vessels that are trying to deliver supplies to the Redcoats. In order for England to continue the war, they have to bring ammunition and cannonballs and uniforms and cold weather gear and food across the Atlantic from England. And John Paul Jones and the Alfred, their mission is to attack these transport ships and knock them out, and if possible, steal that food and medicine and ammunition and all of that, and give it to the Continental troops, because they are low on all of this stuff. Oh my goodness, yeah. And the winters can be brutal, and hey, free food, right? Yeah, exactly. So they aren't they're attacking these ships, which are not expecting to be attacked. That's really an interesting thing here, is that, there's only a handful of warships in the U.S. Navy. John Paul Jones is second in command of the Alfred, which is one of the bigger ones. And, the British are expecting the protection of the Royal Navy, which they have. So it's tricky to get in there and attack one of these merchant convoys. But if you can, there's a lot of advantage to be gained there, which is great. Yeah. Here's a fun John Paul Jones story early on. He participated in the first ever military action undertaken by the United States Marine Corps. Oh. Yeah. So it was March 3rd, 1776. And the U.S. Navy, or the Continental Navy, attacked the capital of the Bahamas. Yeah, it was a night raid. They sailed out at night, and they unloaded 234 Marines onto one of the islands in the Bahamas. And they were dressed in their green Continental jackets. They were commanded by the first Commandant of the United States Marine Corps, Samuel Nichols. They stormed the fort at Nassau, overran the garrison, and captured 88 cannons, 15 mortars, and 24 barrels of gunpowder. Also present at this fort was the governor of the Bahamas, the British governor of the Bahamas. Oh. So John Paul Jones was in command of the ship that dropped these Marines off. They stormed the fortress at Nassau, captured the governor. They ran a... Oh, they captured him. He wasn't just there. They captured him. They captured him. Yeah, captured the governor of the Bahamas. They ran a "Don't Tread on Me" flag up at the fort, and then hauled off all their plunder, which is... Okay. Yeah. John Paul Jones was there for that. Do we know, did they take the governor with them? I believe they ransomed him back. Okay. Yeah. Bold statement. Yeah. So, just chaos and confusion. And capture a bunch of guns that you could use, because you're not really... Exactly. You use those cannons. Yeah. Causing mayhem on purpose. Yes. Raids and stuff like this, because you really can't take the British Navy on. There will be the biggest naval battle of the American Revolution is going to be fought off the coast of Yorktown between the French and the British Navy. There's going to be a huge battle that takes place in the ocean outside of Yorktown, which is why Yorktown surrenders, because the French Navy drives off the British Navy in this huge fight. But for the Continental Navy, no, there's not much. You do hit and run raids like this. They weren't expecting to be attacked in the Bahamas, and it worked. Awesome. The Marine Corps to this day traces back their heritage to that being their first battle. And so for John Paul Jones to be there is kind of cool.
Yeah.
Okay, so Jones is doing a good job aboard this ship. They're taking prizes. They're launching amphibious raids. He's eventually given his own command. He takes over the 12-gun sloop Providence. A sloop is a smaller ship. It's got 12 guns. Alfred had 30. It's a smaller, faster kind of ship. And he heads out to wreak havoc, which he does quite efficiently. He captures 16 British vessels in 6 weeks.
Whoa.
That's a lot.
That's a lot. That's like an average of more than 2 ships per week.
Right.
And that's a lot.
That's a lot. That's a lot of attacks. That's a lot of, and some of these ships will surrender without a fight. You pull up a 12 cannon ship next to this merchantman and they're not soldiers. You've got soldiers on your ship. They'll give up, but you got to find them. You got to sail over there. You got to sneak up on them. There's a lot of cool pirate tricks that you have to do here to pull up that close to a ship that you can capture it. The sloop is a little faster than these merchantmen, so it can gain on them quickly, but you do have to outfox the British fleet and then get away before they show up to bomb you into splinters. So he captures these 16 ships, and then he gets this big coup on November 2nd, 1776, when he attacks the British coal fleet on Isle Royale in the Caribbean. The merchant fleet of the British is transporting coal, and he attacks it. He destroys a big portion of the British merchant fleet. He frees some American prisoners of war that were being held on the island, and he captures a huge British transport ship that's full of winter clothing intended for the British troops stationed in Canada and New York.
Oh, way to go.
Which is huge because this is going into that winter of Valley Forge, where a lot of Americans are going to starve and freeze to death if they don't have food and cold weather clothing, both of which he captures in large quantities at Isle Royale.
Exactly. Yes.
So he's been very successful commanding the Providence after attacking the coal fleet, capturing 16 British ships. He gets another bump. They move him up to the 18-gun ship Ranger. It's a frigate. It's a warship. And they send him to France to kind of help the U.S. cause there. So as I said earlier, the biggest naval battle of the American Revolution was with the French Navy. But in 1776, the French are not technically allies with the colonies yet. So John Paul Jones is pretty famous at this point because he's capturing all these ships. He's getting written up in broadsides and, the newspapers of the day. He is, his story is becoming well known in the colonies and across the world as this very daring, very bold, very brave naval commander who is, you don't capture 16 ships in 6 weeks by being a little timid and overthinking it. It's like, they're there, I'm going to go get them. I wish no connection with a ship that is not, going to go into harm's way. So that's him. And he's got this bombastic personality as well. So he's leading these attacks and he goes out and they're going to send him to France to help the U.S. cause there because he's, becoming a celebrity. So he sails this Ranger across the Atlantic and he gets to Paris where he meets up with his good buddy, Ben Franklin. And yes, Ben Franklin and John Adams are there, and John Adams eventually gets sent home because the French don't like him.
But they do like Benjamin Franklin.
Yes, so John Adams didn't like the French any more than they liked him either. So it was. But John Paul Jones and Ben Franklin, they try to make they rub elbows during the day with the French nobility and the French royalty, and at night they party. In Paris.
Of course they do.
Yes.
Of course they do.
The thing that John Paul Jones was very good at was partying.
Apparently. Yeah. Now, were his diplomatic overtures successful?
They were.
Well, given...
Yes.
We know what happens.
Right. We know what happened. And him and Thomas Jefferson and Ben Franklin, they are able... first they're able to, I think I talked with AJ Jacobs about Beaumarchais. First, they were getting noblemen in France to secretly send weapons and ammunition to the colonies. And eventually they are able to get France to officially join the war.
They must have really liked him because France, as we know, does eventually join the war on the side of the Americans. And John Paul Jones gets on the Ranger and he heads for mainland England. And as John Paul Jones on the Ranger sails away, they receive a formal military salute from the French fleet. And in addition to just being cool, this is the first time a U.S. vessel, an American vessel, has ever been officially saluted by a foreign warship. So this means, in addition to just being cool, it means that France is officially recognizing the United States of America as an independent country. And, you know, it's one thing if you yourself say, oh, hey, we're an independent country, but you can say that. Anyone can say that. But to get another actual established country to recognize you as such makes it official.
Yes. That was a big deal. Like the French fleet firing a salvo to salute John Paul Jones sailing off under a continental flag. I mean, that's a declaration of war against England.
Yeah. That's the implication.
Yeah. And so what does John Paul Jones do? Well, you said he didn't sail back to the colonies.
No. He went to England. He attacks the British town of Whitehaven in the middle of the night. Same thing as he did with Bermuda. Middle of the night, there's a raid. Him and 16 other American sailors, they go into town on rowboats. They sail to the port at Whitehaven. The people of Whitehaven are not expecting a continental ship to sail into the harbor. The continental Navy does not exist. And they're not there's no expectation that a small coastal town, or this is an okay sized coastal town in England, is going to be threatened by the continental Navy. But John Paul Jones being a very daring person who never kind of backed away from a opportunity to sow chaos and destruction, he sails into town on the boat, he gets into two rowboats with these 15 other guys or 16 other guys. He rows onto the docks at Whitehaven and starts setting fire to British ships in the harbor. Oh, whoa.
Yeah, and then he rows back out to his ship and sails away before the British can mobilize troops because we're totally on low alert. They don't have sentries or guard, whatever. Like, they're not expecting to be attacked by anybody. And
the ships are on fire.
And their ships are on fire now, and they got to deal with that.
Oh.
So he sails away.
Wow.
He keeps going down the coast of England, and he finds the private estate of the Earl of Selkirk. So the Earl of Selkirk, he is British royalty or nobleman. Has this huge mansion, prime beachfront property on the English coast overlooking the sea. I imagine a little golf course. I imagine like people dressed in white, like sipping Martha Washington's rum punch out in their backyard, So this very posh British estate, John Paul Jones sails Ranger right outside it, gets in his little rowboat, rows over, and raids the private estate of the Earl of Selkirk. He shows up and is like, hey, we're from the Continental Navy. We're attacking you. And their hope was to capture the Earl and ransom him to try to trade him for U.S. sailors that had been... one of the things the Royal Navy was doing, and most navies were doing at this time, was that the Royal Navy is winning this naval war. John Paul Jones is doing heroic things and winning battles, but the Royal Navy is still in charge here. And when they take an American ship, whether it's a merchant ship or a warship, they force the crew of that ship to be members of the Royal Navy. It's called impressment, but they impress them into service. You work for us now, or you're going overboard, and you can swim home.
Yeesh. Yeah. Okay.
So they're prisoners of war, but now they're actually crew members for the for the other team. And
yeah.
And so John Paul Jones was going to capture the Earl of Selkirk and ransom him for some of these sailors who had been impressed into British service. But when John Paul Jones and his 16 other guys, I'm going to assume, when they get to the estate, they find that he's out of town. He's not home.
Oh, no.
He went out on a business trip or something. He's in London. So they sit down and they have a nice cup of afternoon tea with the Earl's wife.
Oh.
Yeah.
How genteel. How
18th century warfare.
Yeah.
They have tea with his wife, and then some of his guys steal some silver plates, but John Paul Jones doesn't like that, so he orders them to be returned.
Yeah, their beef is not with his wife.
Yeah.
I guess their beef. Do they have a beef specifically with the Earl, or they're just like, okay, your nobility, we're going to ransom you for our impressed guys?
Yeah, he lives on the beach nearby. He's got waterfront property nearby. He's rich and important, and he won't like being captured. We'll capture him and we'll ransom him back. He wasn't there, so they had tea with his wife. A couple of his guys steal some silver plates from her, but he makes them return them with a letter of apology.
Okay, he does have principles.
Yeah, it's bad form to rip off somebody who invited you in for tea and conversation.
Exactly, yes. And I'm also wondering, what's it like from the Earl's wife's point of view? It's maybe subtly badass on her part.
Yeah.
Like, okay, these like dudes show up and...
Battle-hardened dudes, right? They have raided stuff. They have set things on fire. They burn things up. Yeah. What was that conversation like?
Yeah, their nails might not be neatly manicured,
Yeah. I imagine this being a very comedic conversation, right? I imagine she's responding in an extremely British way, and they're like, "Well, we're here to raid you, ma'am."
Oh, of course.
Oh, okay, of course.
Well, before you do that, could I trouble you for some tea?
Yes.
Or trouble you to sit down for some tea or something.
And then they have a nice dinner. Oh, yes, yeah. You're very scary. Okay, well, thanks for the tea, madam. We'll see you later. Tell everybody we were here, please. It would really help us out. Please like and subscribe. And
okay, so did word get around?
Yes, that's the crazy thing about the story, is that word did get around that the U.S. Navy plundered silver dishes from the home of an English earl on the coast of England itself. And everybody in the colonies thought it was like the most awesome thing they'd ever heard. They're all high-fiving each other and clinking their rum punch glasses together in triumph because, like, hey, we stuck it to them for once. They keep raiding our coastal towns and our cities. Like, they've captured, the British at this point have captured New York City. Nothing on the coast is safe because the British control the seas up and down the colonial coast. And so when news gets out, like, John Paul Jones just stole some dishes from a British earl, like, awesome.
Yeah.
Even though he returned them with a letter of apology. Still, doesn't matter. He was there. We were there.
And the principle of the thing is
Yes. So, all right, this is a victory. This is a very, it's a serious emotional victory for the colonies.
Yeah.
And so they start to sail back. But now at this point, news of this has gotten out, and the British know there is an American warship sailing around off the coast of England, and the British have the largest and most powerful navy on Earth, and this is embarrassing for them, and they got to find this guy, and they got to get him. So, yes.
Yeah.
So they send a sloop of war after him, and on the way back, Jones is heading back to France to resupply, and on the way back, he comes across a 20-gun British warship, HMS Drake. Drake has 8 more cannons than the Ranger, and is bigger. It's crewed by Royal Navy guys who are better sailors, better gunners, more accurate shooters. They've got troops on board. They're looking for these guys. They're looking for revenge. And John Paul Jones has never in his entire career fought against another warship.
Ooh.
He's a veteran. He's a many, many year veteran of sailing.
Oh, yeah.
But he was on merchant ships, and then he was a raider, and then he was doing these little raids and stuff, but he's never taken on a British warship before.
Ooh. Is this the tipping point? Like, is this too much, even for John Paul Jones?
Well, he decides to fight. He's being attacked by this thing. It's bigger than him, but he's like, I got to fight. So he turns Ranger around.
He's John Paul Jones.
Yes, he's got to. Think of what they'd say about me if I beat a British warship.
Uh-huh.
So John Paul Jones decides to fight, and he turns Ranger around and he attacks this bigger warship, Drake. It's got 20 guns, and he has no experience fighting this kind of thing, but he's bold and he goes right at it. And he starts firing at it, and they're firing broadsides at each other. And at some point, he, his cannon fire is more effective than theirs. The Ranger loses a few guys, but the Drake loses 40 men. And at some point during the fighting, they lose their captain. And without their captain, they surrender. They strike their colors. And John Paul Jones boards and captures Drake, which it's the first time in the entire war, and the war has been going on for years now, is the first time in the war that the Americans have won against a British warship, which is...
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
In English waters, no less.
In English waters, yeah, in the Channel. They're fighting in the Channel.
Oh, wow.
And
so this even tops stealing the Earl's silver.
Yes. They got that news. It pissed off the British. They attacked him, and he won, and he took their ship, and he drags it back with him to Paris. And goes back there, and he's hanging out with Lafayette. He's hanging out with Ben Franklin. And Lafayette, in particular, gets along really well with Jones. They're both very daring people. They're both very, aggressive 18th century warriors, very, swashbucklery figures. And Lafayette, Jones is a celebrity. He's immediately the most famous American sailor of the Revolutionary War, and will continue to be so forever. Mm-hmm. And Lafayette is able to talk to the king and his buddies in court in France, and they get John Paul Jones command, like they upgrade him again. It's kind of like a video game where he started with like no guns, and he keeps getting upgraded every time he does a good job. They convert a French merchant vessel over to a warship, and they refit it as a 42-gun frigate. Which is big, he had 12 before, and now he's got that's an upgrade.
Definitely,
it's immediately the biggest warship in the U.S. fleet, and it's called the Bonhomme Richard, which is a Ben Franklin reference.
Bonhomme Richard.
Oh, right, yes.
Well, yeah.
Well,
but
pardon my extremely American accent.
I bet some of the sailors were calling it that too. So.
Yes.
Okay.
I'm sure John Paul Jones pronounced it with an extremely Scottish accent, so I bet it sounded really interesting when he said it.
I'm not even going to try that, but okay. So the Bonhomme Richard, the Bonhomme Richard, which is John Paul Jones's ship now. Whoa, with 42 guns and
and this is, of all of the things that he's known for. When he's aboard Bonhomme Richard, that is when he really makes his legend. So we are going to take a really quick break. And when we come back, we're going to talk about the most famous battle of John Paul Jones and of the American Navy and the American Revolution. On September 23rd, 1779, John Paul Jones and Bonhomme Richard come across a fleet of around 40 British merchant vessels. They're being escorted by a 44-gun British frigate named Serapis.
44 guns?
44, yes. So bigger than Bonhomme Richard. And it's not the only British warship escorting this fleet. The British merchant fleet is being attacked constantly by these privateers and the Continental Navy. So now they're going to organize almost like a school of fish. They're going to get a bunch of merchant vessels all together into one big convoy and then escort it with warships, which is the same strategy that was used to cross the North Atlantic during, with all the U-boats during World War II.
Yeah.
Cluster all of the merchant ships up together, guard them with heavily armed warships, and sail them together as a convoy. John Paul Jones finds one of these convoys. He's kind of, maneuvering around the shipping lanes and finds a 40-ship convoy being escorted by 2 British
40
warships.
40 ships. Whoa.
40 ships, a big fleet.
This is piquing his interest, I assume.
Yes. They've got 2 ships, the 44-gun Serapis and the 28-gun Countess of Scarborough. Jones is not alone. So he has a little squadron of Continental and French Navy ships with him. So he's commanding a group of ships, and the French Navy is serious. They rival the British Navy at this point in time. They are very powerful. They will defeat them off Yorktown. They're a strong group. Jones is in charge here, and he orders an attack. We're gonna attack them, and you're gonna leave the big one for me. I got this guy. So he sails Bonhomme Richard at the head of the formation, directly at the head of their formation, and these two guys are gonna brawl it out like a real naval combat situation, 18th century like naval warfare with the wooden ships and the rows of cannons. Jean-Paul Jones closes with Serapis and opens fire with broadsides from cannons. And we're talking like rippling broadsides through multiple decks of guns, and they're both firing at each other. First from long range, and it gets closer and closer. They're both taking hits. They're both taking serious damage. So the Royal Navy is the best trained in the world, and they are putting a lot of hits on Bonhomme Richard. They're larger, they're more heavily armed, and they are hitting Jean-Paul Jones's ship. It catches on fire. It starts taking on water. Many of his crew are being killed or blown into the water. They're bailing bailing overboard. Some of them are drowning on the ship because it's taking on so much water. All of the lower deck guns on his ship become unusable because the Bonhomme Richard has taken on so much water. The sails are getting shot up, so it's losing maneuverability. It's on fire. It's barely staying afloat. He's fighting back, but Serapis is clearly in the advantage here. They are doing a lot more damage to Jean-Paul Jones than he is to them. And at one point, Serapis goes to finish it off, and it pulls up beside Bonhomme Richard and unleashes this huge, like, full broadside volley that smashes the Bonhomme Richard, blows apart the deck, kills a bunch of sailors, and it smashes the main mast of the Bonhomme Richard. So it's taking on water, it's on fire, and the mast falls off. And seeing all of this destruction aboard Bonhomme Richard, the commander of the Serapis, Captain Richard Pearson, he calls a ceasefire. He yells across. He says, "We'll accept your surrender." And Jean-Paul Jones is looking at his kind of shattered crew, his shattered ship. They're doing whatever they can to put out the fires or bail out the water.
There's not much left.
Yeah, the ship's on fire. There's black smoke everywhere. There's dead bodies. And his first mate's like, "Sir, what do you want to do?" And Jean-Paul Jones yells back, "Surrender. I have not yet begun to fight."
Ooh.
He orders the ship to spin around and points it directly at Serapis, and he rams it.
Oh.
With his burning ship, his crew mostly dead, the ship barely able to move, kind of like the end of The Little Mermaid, where like he points the broken like bowsprit at the Serapis and rams it with his ship. And then because most of his guns are ineffectual, most of his crew's gone, like he's half underwater, he really can't allow, it's like a boxer like tying up the other boxer. He can't let the Serapis get any distance from him, because if it does, it'll just fire again and destroy him. So he orders grappling hooks thrown over the side. He tries on purpose to tangle his rigging up with their rigging to like intertwine the two ships so that they're stuck together. Yeah. And they throw hooks over. They start throwing one secret weapon that Jean-Paul Jones has on board is that his guys have all made like homemade bombs, like hand grenades, and they start throwing those over, like just lighting them on fire and chucking them over onto the other ship. They set Serapis on fire and kill some of the Royal Navy sailors on the deck. And the British ship, they have Royal Marines on board, and those guys start to organize. These are trained soldiers, right? Jean-Paul Jones's guys are trained as sailors. They're not trained as mercenaries or soldiers or whatever. They're much more talented, climbing the mast than they are with a gun or a knife or a sword. But that's what it comes to, is that the Royal Marines come over to the Bonhomme Richard, and Jean-Paul Jones has to personally lead a group of his own guys to fight them off. So he drives the Royal Marines back with musket fire. Then he and his guys board Serapis and attack the Royal Marines aboard Serapis. They've got swords, pistols, muskets. They're hand-to-hand fighting on the burning deck of this warship. It's like a movie, right?
Wow.
I think it was a movie. I think Peter Cushing plays John Paul Jones in it. But Peter Cushing plays Captain Pearson. John Paul Jones is
because of course that's a Peter Cushing role. He's on the Empire's side.
That's always true, huh? Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's see, Robert Stack. All right, there we go. That's John Paul Jones in that movie. But I saw it a long time ago, and it came out before I was born. So it was a favorite of my father's, though. And
with a scene like that, how could it not be?
Right. And so I mean, the movie takes a little bit of creative license, but story. But
anyway,
so John Paul Jones charges over, and they take Serapis. Captain Pearson surrenders the ship. John Paul Jones takes it, even though his own ship has been so destroyed that it's unusable. They have to, both ships are very badly damaged. Each one has lost more than half of their crew. And so, they're both on fire, all of this. We can't save both these ships. So what Jones does is he orders his entire crew to come over to Serapis. He captures Serapis and lets Bonhomme Richard sink. But he takes command of Serapis. So
he basically trades in his old ship to get an upgrade?
Yeah, I guess that's a good way to look at it.
It seems like a very mild-mannered way of putting it. Like, just take it to the dealership. But actually, this is after an intense battle with odds that were really not in their favor at many points.
Yes, and then the convoy's taken, and it's one of the biggest captures that the colonies will have throughout the entire war. And this is definitely the biggest naval battle that a colonial ship will participate in during the entire American Revolution.
So he's outdone himself yet again.
And who would have thought you could have done anything better than stealing some silver dishes from the Earl of Selkirk?
Yeah. Wow. So that's the Serapis. So he takes this British warship, and the British were not happy about this.
No.
I mean, obviously, yeah. And the Serapis, when I was looking up the Serapis, there is a specific flag called the Serapis flag. And I just wanted to go down that rabbit hole for a bit, because it seems like it's in character with John Paul Jones. So the Serapis flag, if you look it up, it looks like some sort of weird parallel universe US flag, And okay, back in those days, there were all these different versions of the US flag, colonial flag, whatever, floating around out here. And this flag got commemorated on a commemorative stamp on Flag Day in 2000. Okay, it's got 13 stars.
Flag Day's coming up.
Oh, yeah.
As of the recording, I think this is going to come out the Tuesday after Flag Day, but as of the week we are recording this is going to be Flag Day soon. So now we'll have a good Flag Day story.
Mm-hmm. So it's got in the one corner 13 stars, white against a dark blue background. I'm sure there's an official term for that shade of blue. That makes sense, and there are also 13 stripes. And we're like, American flag. But they're this chaotic mishmash of red, white, and blue. And they're not really in a predictable order. And it's like if cheap AI tried to design an American flag or something like that.
That is what it looks like. Because I'm looking it up as you're telling the story, and it's wild looking.
Yeah. And the thing is, America as a country, it's still kind of figuring itself out. And there's a letter that Benjamin Franklin wrote, Benjamin Franklin and or John Adams wrote, saying, the flag of the United States of America consists of 13 stripes, alternately red, white, and blue. A small square in the upper angle next to the flagstaff is a blue field with 13 white stars denoting a new constellation. Now, why does this written description matter? Well, in the battle with the Serapis, he has now taken over this ship, and he and his sailors are sailing it away. The British are pissed off. They're looking for some way to get at him. And in all of the commotion that you described so vividly, Ben, maybe wasn't the first thing on their minds, but in all the mayhem, the continental sailors lost their American flag. So when they take over the Serapis, they don't have an American flag to run up the mast and say, hey, this is ours.
Yeah, and it got blown off when the mainmast got blown off by the cannonball. That was why Captain Pearson was like, are you surrendering? Because the American flag got blown away, like literally blown away, disappeared, cannot be found. And so he was like, oh, are you running your colors? Because that was the traditional way to say, like, I surrender. Was not easy to scream to the other ship. So if you were going to surrender, you would run your flag down the flagpole and run a white flag up, or just run your flag down. It's called striking your colors, and it just means I give up, stop shooting, please. And so when when John Paul Jones's mask got blown off, Bonhomme Richard, the Pearson was like, is that why you're surrendering? And that was when Jones was like, I have not yet begun to fight, and rammed him. But
yeah, clearly Pearson did not know John Paul Jones.
No.
But so they don't have a flag, so they're sailing around on the Serapis without a flag of a nation. And they wind up sailing to Texel, which is an island off the coast of the Netherlands. It's close to France, but it's not actually France.
Why would they go to Holland?
Maybe that's the closest place once they were on the water. I don't know.
Oh, yeah, because your ship's sinking.
Okay, yeah, your ship's sinking, so you want to get to land as soon as you can. But this is the Netherlands. It's not France. In France, they knew they would be okay because France is now recognizing America and buddies. But the Netherlands are officially neutral as far as the British and the Americans were concerned. Now, John Paul Jones and his guys and the Serapis, they're, in Dutch waters now. Does this mean that the Brits leave John Paul Jones alone?
I think this is like a good opportunity for them to get to him, right? If it's neutral.
Yeah.
And they got to get their guys back, right? He's got Captain Pearson and the crew of the Serapis are prisoners right now. It might be a chance to get those guys back.
Yeah. So the Brits are coming after him. They go after him. And since he's not flying a national flag, they write him up and they say, oh, this is piracy.
Oh, that's genius.
Yeah.
That's clever.
Yep.
He's a pirate. He's not wearing a flag. He's not carrying a flag. He's he's attacking our ships on up the coast of our port. Like, it's unauthorized.
Fair game.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So John Paul Jones tends to solve things with maneuvering and firepower. Here, though, it's a case for the diplomats. So what the diplomats do is they dig out this written description of what a U.S. flag should or maybe could look like. And hey, this written description, the one that we read earlier, they have that in writing among the Dutch records. And I guess courtesy of the American ambassador to the Netherlands. And so they get some pieces of cloth and quick Betsy Ross up a flag according to the written description. And, it's just like, okay, yeah, close enough for government work. And the Dutch officials look at the flag and they say, oh, wow, golly. I mean, they're probably saying this in Dutch or maybe in English, I don't know. But they say, that flag that you've just flown on the Serapis, golly, that looks like the official description that we have here in our records, which are written.
This is like a Flag Day heroism story.
Yeah.
They made a fake flag that they were like, I don't know, it kind of looks like the U.S. flag. They just kind of drew it out, like you said, like cheap AI. And then the Dutch don't have a picture of this thing. I've never seen one before. They just have this description, which in the Benjamin Franklin and John Adams description says alternating stripes of red, white, and blue.
Yeah. And
it's possible that some of the sailors on this ship had never seen this flag. I mean, that's like the crazy thing about where 1778, 1779, the flag of the colonies has not, like, it's been formalized, but it's possible that some of these guys have been at sea, they've been at war. It's possible they've never seen one either. So we're just like, oh, I'll just go off this description, I'll do that. And the Dutch were like, yeah, it looks good to me. I don't know. I have no frame of reference.
And then they got someone, okay, so the flag that they actually sewed up and ran up the mast of the Serapis, they got someone to draw a sketch of it. And then they inserted that sketch in their records so they could say, oh, look, yes, we have documentation. We have, I don't know if you can call this prior art or what. So that's
We were always flying this flag. I don't know what you're talking about. We would never deceive the government of the Netherlands. Well, I feel like the Dutch didn't want to be involved with this at all. If I was Holland, I would not want to like be part of this and be like, okay, you guys deal with this, but like, don't make me pick a side here, right?
Yeah.
I'm trying to stay out of this war. I've got enough enemies as it is, right? I don't need to get involved in this.
So yeah, that's the flag of the Serapis.
That's awesome. Wow. I had never heard that story before, and it's awesome. One other story that was new to me while I was researching this podcast was that, you know, for John Paul Jones, this is an amazing victory. This is a heroic victory. He's going to be the father of the American Navy. He's going to go down in history as one of the greatest naval heroes in the history of the United States. But interestingly, Sir Richard Pearson, the guy who was the commander of Serapis, when he goes home to England, and you'd think like there would be some sort of like ignominy around being, you know, the first captain that fought an American vessel and lost, he was killed in action. So he doesn't have to like face that. But this guy was captured, and maybe you'd think there would be some sort of disgrace associated with it. But no, when Captain Richard Pearson returns home to England, he's recognized as a hero. They knight him for like putting up such a good fight against John Paul Jones and the French Navy and the American Navy. He becomes a hero in his hometown. He starts getting some presents from merchants and people from several of these other towns in England around him. People whose ships he was protecting, right? They view him as he was kind of nobly attempting to defend this ship against rebel forces attacking him. And, you know, he kind of made a name for himself as he became pretty famous in England when he returned. John Paul Jones found out about this and was asked about it. Like, did you hear that they knighted Captain Richard Pearson and, you know, because he fought you? And according to the stories, John Paul Jones responded with, well, I'd love to meet him on the high seas again. I'll make him a lord. That's John Paul Jones for you. He's always looking for a fight. But yeah, for Jones, this was, you know, all of the glory and fame he had been looking for his whole life. He is knighted as well. He's knighted by King Louis of France, and is given a gold-plated ceremonial sword by the King of France. And he was like, oh, well, this will replace the one that I just busted up in a big battle. My old sword's not usable anymore because I've been fighting the British with it. You know, I blunted it on a bunch of muskets. And so I'll use this golden sword to fight with in the future. He gets the Order of Military Merit from the French government, and he is issued a special Medal of Valor by the Continental Congress in 1787. The British, for their part, they still thought of him as little better than a criminal. And after the war, even, you know, as part of the treaty negotiations after the war, the British demanded that John Paul Jones be hung as a pirate because of his actions on the coast of England.
Okay, well, they can say that, but after the revolution ended, John Paul Jones does go on to do other things. So the U.S., which is now officially the U.S., didn't have a whole lot of wars going on in the late 1780s. So John Paul Jones heads over to Russia, and he works for the Empress Catherine II, and he kind of Russianizes his name, like Pavel Joneses. Pavel Jones, imagine that written in Cyrillic script. He was made a vice admiral and given command of the Imperial Navy's 24-gun flagship Vladimir. And on the Vladimir, he led the Russian defense of the Liman region of the Black Sea when it was being attacked by the Ottomans, and he won several victories and drove out the Turks. And for that, he was awarded the Order of St. Anne by the Tsarina. So, like, how many countries has he gotten awards from now?
Right.
3?
Now, like King Louis of France and the American Continental Congress and Catherine the Great all awarded him medals of valor for, you know, heroism in naval combat across the world. It's amazing.
And he went back to St. Petersburg, but there was too much, I don't know, political intrigue, and he was like, nah, not my thing. So he retires to Paris in 1790. He dies in 1792, and he's buried in St. Louis Cemetery. I guess that would be St. Louis Cemetery, not far from his home. And later, his remains were exhumed and returned to the U.S. with a military escort consisting of several battleships. His remains now reside at the United States Naval Academy Chapel in a sarcophagus modeled after Napoleon's coffin. And he was buried much later with full military honors in a ceremony presided over by fellow badass Theodore Roosevelt.
Yeah. And John Paul Jones is still there. You can, he's at the U.S. Naval Academy in the chapel there. There's a sarcophagus that's modeled after Napoleon, which is kind of interesting because John Paul Jones predates Napoleon. But he's still there, and they have the quote there about I wish no connection with a ship that does not go fast, for I intend to go in harm's way, is inscribed there. And he's
as it should be.
Right. He's the father of the American Navy, and led it in its beginnings, raised the first ensign over the first U.S. Navy flag, dropped off the first contingent of American Marines to their first mission. He attacked the British in England. He stole some plates from the Earl of Selkirk and then returned them with an apology, which I do love about him. He never turned away from a fight.
No.
He defeated the first British warship in combat. And then when that wasn't enough, he did it on a much grander scale again, the second time. And when that was over, he didn't make any didn't retire and become a politician as many of the war heroes of the revolution did. He signed on with Catherine the Great and fought in Russia against the Turks because he wanted to keep battling. And that was just the personality of John Paul Jones, is very aggressive, bombastic, I want to fight all the time. And he did, and he was very good at it.
He did, yes.
And that's how we remember him today. So it's a Flag Day hero. It was an unexpected Flag Day hero. I really didn't see that story coming, but I like it.
Yeah. Well,
so happy Flag Day, Martha Washington.
Yeah.
We talked about Betsy Ross. We did talk about that. So
we did. Yeah,
we hit all the Flag Day heroes.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you guys so much for listening. We really hope you liked the story, and we really hope to see you again next week with another one. We'll see you then.
Stay badass.
Executive producers are me, Ben Thompson, Dr. Patricia Larish, and Andrew Jacobs. Writing is by me and Pat. Story editing by Ian Jacobs. Mixing and music and sound design by Jude Brewer. Special thanks to Noel Brown at iHeartRadio. Badass of the Week is based on my website, badassoftheweek.com, where you can read all sorts of stories about other badasses. If you want to reach out with questions or ideas, you can email us at badasspodcast@badassoftheweek.com. If you like the podcast, please subscribe, follow, listen, tell your friends, and tell your enemies. And please leave us a rating. We'll be back next week with another one.